Hello, my friend, and welcome to the Sleepy Scholar. Tonight, we are going to spend some time with a creature so familiar that most people stop seeing it at all. A small shape at the edge of a lawn at dusk, a soft toy on a child's shelf, a logo, a mascot, a shape cut into the full moon by cultures who never met each other and somehow saw the same thing. Tonight's subject is the rabbit, and I want you to imagine it differently than you have before. Not as a simple animal, but as a very old, very patient piece of engineering. A heartbeat wrapped in fur. A nervous system built almost entirely around the act of noticing. Something so tuned to the world around it that it can hear a hawk's wing beat shift in the air or feel a fox's footstep through the ground long before you or I would sense anything at all. The rabbit has been quietly practicing the art of survival for somewhere around 40 million years, refining itself again and again, until it became this soft, watchful, endlessly alert, and yet somehow, in its stillness, one of the calmest looking animals in the world. Maybe you've had a long day. Maybe your mind has been busy since the moment you woke up, turning over conversations, plans, small worries, replaying things that already happened and rehearsing things that haven't happened yet. That's all right. You don't need cosmic mysteries tonight, and you don't need to count sheep. You just need somewhere soft to rest your attention while your body does what it already knows how to do. So we'll wander gently through this tonight, through fur and folklore, through burrows and bloodlines, through a story that stretches back further than almost anything else breathing on this planet right now. There is nowhere else you need to be. Nothing here to remember, nothing to solve. If these gentle journeys ever help you drift off, you're welcome to like or subscribe, only if it feels good to you. It simply helps other sleepy souls find their way here too, the way you did. For now, let's just begin to settle. Let your body soften into whatever is holding you right now, the mattress, the couch, the seat, the floor. You don't have to do anything with that softness. Just notice it's already happening, the way it happens every night, whether you pay attention to it or not. Let your breathing slow down just a little, not forced, not counted. Just a small, natural loosening, like a held breath finally being allowed to go. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears, even if they've been sitting up near them all day without you noticing. Let your jaw unclench. Let your tongue rest heavy at the bottom of your mouth. Let your hands go soft, your fingers slightly curled, doing nothing, needing to do nothing. You don't need to remember any of what I'm about to tell you. You don't need to follow every sentence. If your mind drifts away in the middle of a thought and comes back 3 sentences later, or doesn't come back at all, that's not failing at this. That's the whole point. Nothing here is a test. There's no version of tonight where you do this wrong. Whatever effort your day asked of you, you can set it down now, fully, the way you might set down something heavy you've been carrying so long you almost forgot you we're holding it at all. There's nothing left to carry for the next little while. Just the sound of a quiet voice and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breath, doing what it has always known how to do. So let your mind drift, soft and unhurried, as we begin. Somewhere in the tall grass at the edge of a field, right at the exact moment when the sky stops being blue and hasn't yet become black, a rabbit is waking up. Rabbits are what's called crepuscular, which is really just a gentle-sounding word for creatures who live mostly in the in-between hours, dawn and dusk, the soft seams of the day. They are not creatures of harsh noon light or deep midnight dark. They belong to the hush just before morning and the hush just after evening, the hours when the world itself seems to be breathing more slowly. There's something quietly comforting in that. A whole species that has organized its entire life around twilight, around the gentlest hours the day has to offer. For millions of years, this timing has kept rabbits a little safer. Many of their predators hunt more actively in full daylight or the deep of night. So the rabbit has found its narrow, soft window in between and simply lives there. Tonight, as the light in your own room dims, or as you lie somewhere between waking and sleeping, you're passing through a version of that same soft threshold the rabbit has always called home. But that is only one small part of the story. If you ever watched a rabbit closely, really closely, you might have noticed its nose never quite stops moving. 12 times a minute, sometimes more, up to 120 tiny twitches. That small pink nose is opening and closing, pulling in the world in short little breaths. Each twitch draws air across an enormous surface of scent-detecting tissue tucked inside that small skull, far more of it, relative to size, than we carry in our own noses. A rabbit isn't just smelling the grass, or the dirt, or the rain that might be coming. It's reading a kind of invisible newspaper written in scent. Which fox passed through an hour ago? Which rabbit was here yesterday? Whether danger lingered nearby recently or moved on long since. All of this gathered without a single sound, without a single glance. There is something moving about a creature whose entire safety depends on something so quiet and so constant. A small twitching nose, endlessly checking, endlessly listening to a language none of us can hear. You have senses like this too, working quietly beneath your awareness right now, reading temperature, pressure, the small shifts of your own body, without you ever needing to think about it. There's something else worth resting on for a moment. A rabbit's eyes sit high and far apart on the sides of its skull, almost like two small lookout towers built into the architecture of its face. Because of this placement, a rabbit can see nearly the entire circle of the world around it at once, closer to 360 degrees than almost any other mammal you could name. While it grazes with its head down, It is still, somehow, watching the sky above and the field behind, all at the same time. There's a strange and gentle irony hidden in this. With eyes built to see almost everything, a rabbit actually has one small blind spot, a narrow patch of space right in front of its own nose, right where the two fields of vision overlap and cancel each other into a kind of soft gap. The one place a rabbit cannot quite see clearly is the ground directly under its own chin. Maybe that feels familiar. So often the thing closest to us, our own worries, our own thoughts turning in tight circles, is the hardest thing of all to see clearly. The rabbit manages this by trusting its whiskers, its nose, its sense of touch, to fill in what its eyes cannot show it. Perhaps tonight, in the same way, you can let go of needing to see everything clearly and simply trust that the rest of you already knows the way. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. A rabbit's ears are not simply for hearing. Although they hear extraordinarily well, tuned to catch even the faint compression of air made by an owl's silent wingbeat. Each ear can rotate almost independently, turning like a small dish antenna toward whatever sound has caught its attention, without the rabbit needing to move its head or its body at all. But ears this large, thin, and richly threaded with blood vessels serve a second, quieter purpose too. They act almost like a radiator, letting heat drift gently out of the body and into the cooler evening air. On a warm day, a rabbit doesn't sweat the way we do. It simply lets its ears do the work, blood moving close to the surface, warmth dispersing slowly outward, the whole animal cooling itself from the edges inward. There's something soothing in imagining that heat simply leaving the body, drawn out gently through two thin, patient ears. No effort required. If you notice any warmth or tension gathered in you tonight, in your hands, your face, your chest, you can imagine it easing outward in that same slow, unhurried way. Nothing forced, just release, drifting outward like warmth into evening air. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Beneath the surface of nearly every wild rabbit's home lies a structure far more complicated than most people imagine, a warren. Not simply a hole in the ground, but an underground settlement, sometimes with dozens of entrances, tunnels branching and rejoining like the roots of an old tree, chambers set aside for sleeping, others for raising young, others left as quiet dead ends, meant only to confuse a predator who dares to follow. Some warrens are generations old, expanded slowly over years by rabbit after rabbit, each one adding a little more architecture to a shared, inherited home. Beneath a single quiet meadow, there might be a hidden city of soft-walled rooms and corridors, cool and dim, entirely invisible from above, holding whole family lines of rabbits who have never seen each other's grandparents, but live, unknowingly, in tunnels their grandparents dug. There is something quietly moving about a home built like that, layered, inherited, expanded by hands or paws that came before you, still holding you safely now, even though you never met the ones who shaped it. Your own body, right now, is resting inside systems built the same way, inherited rhythms, inherited instincts, refined by every creature that came before you. All of it quietly working to keep you safe tonight, whether you notice it or not. But that is only one small part of the story. Long before there were warrens in English meadows or hutches in quiet backyards, there was a much older beginning. The modern rabbit most of us picture, the wild European rabbit, and every fluffy domestic descendant of it, traces its origins back to the Iberian Peninsula, the land that is now Spain and Portugal. In fact, some historians believe the very name of that land may be tied to the word for rabbit in an ancient language once spoken there. A whole peninsula, perhaps, quietly named after this one small, soft-footed animal. For a very long stretch of history, rabbits lived almost nowhere else on Earth in the wild. It was people, traders, sailors, soldiers, monks, who slowly carried them outward, island by island, coastline by coastline, until an animal that had once belonged to one small corner of Europe was living, centuries later, on nearly every continent except Antarctica. There's something worth sitting within that. A creature that seems, today, to belong everywhere, actually began in one small, specific place. The way a single quiet thought, carried gently outward, can eventually reach further than anyone who first had it could have imagined. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Rabbits are often lumped together with rodents in casual conversation. Mice, squirrels, rats, rabbits, all filed under the same soft mental folder. But biologically, this isn't quite right. Rabbits, along with hares, and a smaller, round-eared cousin called the pika, belong to an entirely separate order of mammals called lagomorphs, distinct from rodents in real and specific ways. One of the clearest differences hides in the mouth. Rodents have a single pair of upper incisors. Lagomorphs have two pairs, a large front pair, and a second, smaller pair tucked directly behind them, almost like a hidden backup set. Scientists sometimes call this the peg teeth. For a long time, this small anatomical detail, along with differences deep in their skeletons and even their diet, was enough to convince researchers that rabbits deserved a family tree entirely of their own. There's a quiet kind of dignity in that, being close enough to something to be mistaken for it, and yet being, underneath, something entirely and specifically your own. You, too, might resemble the people around you in 100 small ways tonight, and still be something singular and irreplaceable, made of a history no one else carries in quite the same order. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. A rabbit's back legs are unlike almost anything else in the animal kingdom of a similar size. Long, powerful, layered with dense muscle, built almost entirely around a single purpose: explosive, sudden acceleration. A resting rabbit can go from complete stillness to nearly full speed within a fraction of a second. No slow warm-up, no gradual build-up. Just stillness and then motion. Some rabbits and hares can reach speeds of over 30, even approaching 45 miles an hour in short bursts, weaving unpredictably left and right as they run. A technique that makes it far harder for a pursuing predator to guess where the next step will land. It isn't raw speed alone that saves them. It's the unpredictability layered on top of it. A body that seems to know, instinctively, that survival sometimes depends less on being fast and more on being impossible to anticipate. There's something worth holding on to in that. So much of what keeps a small, soft creature safe in a dangerous world isn't force. It's readiness, held quietly, needing nothing until the exact moment it's needed. Your body carries a version of that too, systems and reflexes standing by, unused most nights, simply resting, simply ready, asking nothing of you right now. But that is only one small part of the story. There is a reason the phrase, breeding like rabbits, has lasted so long in so many languages. A female rabbit can become pregnant again almost immediately after giving birth, and her pregnancy lasts only around 30 days, barely a month from beginning to end. In favorable conditions, a single female could theoretically produce several litters in a single year, each one holding anywhere from a handful to a dozen kids. This isn't recklessness. It's strategy, shaped by millions of years of being near the bottom of many food chains. When so many creatures are hunting you, the most reliable answer evolution can offer is abundance. Not every rabbit needs to survive for the species to continue. Only enough of them, born often enough, to outpace what is lost. It's a quiet, unglamorous kind of resilience, built not on individual strength, but on sheer, patient repetition. There is something almost comforting in imagining a strategy like that, not needing to win every time, only needing to keep gently trying, keep gently returning, trusting that persistence itself is its own kind of protection. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Baby rabbits, called kits, arrive into the world in a state of almost complete helplessness. Blind, hairless, deaf, weighing barely an ounce, they are born into a shallow nest lined with soft fur the mother has pulled from her own belly, tucked into a hidden burrow or a simple depression in the grass, camouflaged and quiet. And then, strangely, the mother mostly disappears. Unlike many mammal parents who stay close constantly, a mother rabbit typically visits her nest only once or twice a day, often just before dawn or after dusk, nursing her kits for only a few minutes at a time before leaving again. It sounds almost neglectful until you understand the reason. Every visit risks drawing a predator's attention to the nest. By staying away, by visiting briefly and rarely, she is protecting her young far more than constant closeness ever could. There is something quietly profound in that kind of love, care expressed not through constant presence, but through careful, deliberate distance, chosen specifically because it keeps the ones you love safer. Sometimes, the gentlest thing anyone can do is exactly that kind of quiet, patient restraint. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Rabbits communicate almost entirely without sound. Where many animals bark, howl, or call to one another, rabbits live in a world built mostly of silence, body language, and one very specific gesture, the thump. When a rabbit senses danger, it will strike the ground hard with its powerful hind foot, sending a sharp vibration through the earth itself, a warning that travels not through air, but through soil, felt by every rabbit nearby long before any sound would have reached them. It's a language built for a world where staying quiet usually means staying alive. A single thump can clear an entire warren of rabbits into safety within seconds. An entire community moving as one in response to a message that never used a single word. There is something worth holding tonight in the idea of a warning or a comfort that doesn't need words at all, that can travel simply through closeness, through shared ground, through the quiet fact of being near someone who is paying attention. You don't need words right now either. You can simply rest in the quiet and let that be enough. But that is only one small part of the story. Not every rabbit movement is about danger. There is another motion, just as distinct, that means almost the opposite, a joyful, sudden leap into the air, often twisting mid-flight, sometimes kicking the hind legs out sideways in a burst of pure, uncomplicated delight. This behavior even has its own affectionate name among people who spend time around rabbits, a binky. No one fully knows why rabbits binky, only that it seems to happen when a rabbit feels entirely safe, entirely at ease, entirely free of anything urgent to attend to. It's not a signal meant for anyone else, the way a thump is. It appears to exist purely for the rabbit itself, an expression with no audience, no function beyond the simple, physical experience of feeling good. There's something worth smiling gently at in that. Even a creature built almost entirely around vigilance and survival still makes space when it feels safe enough for a moment of pure, unnecessary joy. Perhaps, in your own quiet way tonight, you can let yourself have a small binky of your own, nothing dramatic, just a soft, private permission to feel, for these few minutes, entirely safe. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Rabbit society, at least among wild European rabbits, is far more structured than it might appear from the outside. Within a warren, rabbits often live in a loose but real hierarchy, with certain individuals holding more central burrows, better access to food, and more say in group decisions like when to flee or where to graze. It isn't chaos underground. It's closer to a quiet, complicated neighborhood, complete with its own subtle rules. Higher-ranking rabbits tend to have calmer lives, less exposure to the riskiest outer edges of the warren, more central and protected sleeping chambers. Lower-ranking rabbits often take on more exposed positions, watchful roles nearer the entrances, a kind of shared labor spread unevenly but purposefully across the group. There's something almost human in that structure, the way any community, rabbit or otherwise, tends to organize itself so that vigilance and rest are shared unevenly, so that not every single member has to carry the same weight of watchfulness at the same time. Tonight, you don't have to carry any watchfulness at all. Let someone or something else hold that for a while. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. If you have ever seen a rabbit sit almost perfectly frozen, ears low, body pressed flat against the ground, utterly motionless even as danger passes nearby, you have witnessed one of its oldest and most effective defenses, not flight, but freeze. Long before a rabbit ever needs to run, it will often try simply not to be noticed at all, trusting its mottled brown coat and complete stillness to blend into the texture of the world around it. This isn't fear in the way we might imagine it. It's closer to patience, an enormous, full-body patience, holding perfectly still for minutes at a time, waiting for a threat to lose interest and move on, rather than spending precious energy running from something that might not have noticed it in the first place. There's a quiet lesson in that kind of stillness. Not every danger or every worry needs to be run from immediately. Sometimes the wisest response, the one built by millions of years of careful evolution, is simply to go still, breathe softly, and let the moment pass on its own. But that is only one small part of the story. Not all rabbits and hares wear the same coat all year. The snowshoe hare, a close cousin of the rabbit found across the cold northern forests of North America, changes color with the seasons, a rich reddish brown in summer, shifting slowly to pure white by the time winter snow arrives, then back again as spring returns. This transformation isn't triggered by temperature or the presence of snow itself, but mostly by the changing length of daylight. An internal calendar the hare's body reads with remarkable precision, months in advance, preparing its coat for a winter that hasn't arrived yet. It's a slow, gradual change, weeks in the making, each hair replaced in its own quiet time until the whole animal has become a different color entirely. There's something worth holding in that kind of transformation. Not sudden, not forced, simply unfolding gradually according to its own unhurried timeline, trusting an inner rhythm more than any single external moment. Whatever is shifting slowly in your own life right now doesn't need to be finished tonight. It's allowed to keep unfolding gently in its own good time. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Far above the tree line, in the cold, thin air of high mountain slopes, lives the rabbit's smallest and perhaps most industrious relative, the pika. Round-eared, tailless, barely larger than a fist, the pika spends much of its short summer gathering wildflowers and grasses into small piles, laying them out in the sun to dry into a kind of natural hay, before carrying it all back to store beneath rocks for the long winter ahead. These little haystacks, carefully built and constantly checked, sometimes rearranged if rain threatens to spoil them, can be the difference between survival and starvation once the snow closes in. A creature small enough to fit in your palm, spending its whole short summer thinking almost entirely about winter, quietly, patiently, without any hurry or panic, just steady, repeated gathering, one mouthful at a time. There's something gentle worth borrowing from the pika tonight. Rest, too, can be gathered exactly like that, not all at once, not through force, but in small, steady, repeated moments, each one tucked away safely, each one adding quietly to whatever reserves your own body is slowly building right now. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. A rabbit's incisors never stop growing, unlike your teeth or mine, which reach a fixed size and simply stay that way. A rabbit's front teeth continue growing throughout its entire life, sometimes several inches a year, constantly renewing themselves. If left unchecked by wear, they would eventually curl and grow far too long for the rabbit to eat it all. This is precisely why rabbits gnaw almost constantly, not out of nervous habit, but out of quiet biological necessity, wearing their teeth down at roughly the same rate they grow. An endless, careful balance maintained hour by hour, day by day, for an entire lifetime. Grass, bark, twigs, all of it serving double duty as both food and dental care, effortlessly combined into a single quiet, repeated act. There's something oddly comforting in a body built to constantly renew and maintain itself without needing conscious thought or effort. Your own body is doing something remarkably similar tonight, repairing, renewing, quietly maintaining itself in the dark, asking nothing of your attention to keep doing its patient, necessary work. But that is only one small part of the story. rabbits practice something that might sound strange the first time you hear it. They eat some of their own droppings. Specifically, a soft, nutrient-rich type called secatropes, produced after food first passes through a specialized pouch near the end of the digestive system called the cecum. By eating these secatropes directly from the source and passing the food through their system a second time, rabbits are able to extract far more nutrition from tough, fibrous plants than a single pass through their gut ever could. It's called refection, and rather than being wasteful or strange, it's actually an elegant solution to a real problem. Grass and fibrous plants are notoriously difficult to fully digest, and this second pass allows a small animal with a small stomach to survive almost entirely on food most other creatures would find nutritionally poor. There's something worth appreciating in that kind of resourcefulness. Nothing wasted, everything given a second chance to be useful, every bit of nourishment gently, patiently extracted before finally letting go of what remains. Perhaps some of what you experienced today deserves that same quiet second pass tonight, not dwelling on it, just letting your mind gently draw out anything useful before releasing the rest completely. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Long before rabbits, as we know them, existed, an ancient ancestor was already quietly present on Earth. Fossil evidence places early lagomorphs, the broader family that includes rabbits, hares, and pikas, as far back as around 40 million years ago, likely originating somewhere in Asia before slowly spreading outward across the ancient world, long before the first humans, long before most of the mammals we'd recognize today. 40 million years is a span of time almost impossible to hold in the mind clearly. Entire mountain ranges have risen and eroded away in that time. Oceans have shifted their shapes, and somewhere in the middle of all that vast, slow change, a small, soft-footed animal was already quietly perfecting the same basic shape it largely still carries today. Long ears, powerful hind legs, watchful eyes set wide apart. There's something steadying in imagining a form that patient, that enduring, still recognizable across tens of millions of years of an ever-changing world. Above you tonight, the same steadiness continues. The stars are ancient. The earth keeps turning. And none of it needs your effort to keep unfolding exactly as it has for a very, very long time. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Rabbit fur is not a single simple layer, but two distinct kinds of hair working together. A soft, dense undercoat sits close against the skin, trapping warmth like a built-in blanket, while longer, coarser guard hairs lie over the top, shedding water and protecting the delicate undercoat from dirt, moisture, and wear. This double layer system allows a rabbit to stay remarkably warm even through cold, damp weather, without needing the heavy bulk that keeps larger animals warm. It's a design built around efficiency, maximum warmth, minimum weight. Nothing wasted on an animal that depends on speed and lightness to survive. There's something worth borrowing from that design tonight. You don't need something heavy or complicated to feel warm and protected right now. Sometimes the simplest layers, softness closest to you, something a little sturdier just beyond it, are more than enough to hold real warmth in place. But that is only one small part of the story. Across an enormous range of cultures, in places that had no contact with one another for most of human history, people have looked up at the full moon and seen the same shape, not a face, but a rabbit. In parts of East Asia, the story tells of a rabbit pounding the elixir of immortality with a mortar and pestle, forever visible in the moon's pale markings. In parts of Mesoamerica, old Aztec stories describe a god casting a rabbit onto the moon's surface to dim its brightness, so it would never outshine the sun. It's a strange and beautiful coincidence, or perhaps not a coincidence at all, but simply what happens when different groups of people, separated by oceans and centuries, look up at the exact same pattern of light and shadow and quietly arrive at a similar answer. Something about that particular arrangement of gray and pale patches seems to naturally resemble the crouched shape of a small, long-eared animal, no matter who is doing the looking. There's something comforting in imagining tonight that people across thousands of years and thousands of miles have looked up at that same moon and found the same small, gentle shape resting quietly there. You're joining a very long, very old tradition simply by letting your own eyes grow heavy under that same sky. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. The Easter Bunny, so familiar today, likely traces its roots back much further than the holiday itself, to older springtime traditions celebrating fertility, renewal, and the return of life after winter. Rabbits, with their remarkable ability to reproduce quickly and often, became a natural symbol for this seasonal rebirth in various European folk traditions long before they were tied to any specific modern holiday. Over centuries, layers of different customs slowly folded into one another springtime symbols, egg traditions from entirely separate origins, and the rabbit itself, until the figure we recognize today gradually took shape, carrying inside it traces of festivals far older than most people realize. There's something worth appreciating in a symbol built slowly, layer upon layer, across generations, each one adding something small until the whole became something larger than any single tradition intended. so much of what feels simple and familiar to us today carries, underneath, a much longer and quieter history than we usually pause to notice. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. The phrase rabbit's foot, carried in pockets for luck across many cultures for generations, traces back to old folk beliefs that certain parts of certain animals held protective power. The rabbit, prolific, alert, and elusive, seemed a natural choice for a charm meant to bring safety and good fortune. Some traditions were even more specific, insisting only the left hind foot counted, or that it needed to be taken under a particular phase of the moon to hold its power. Whether or not any of it ever carried real luck, the belief itself traveled remarkably far and lasted remarkably long, carried quietly in pockets, on keychains, in old stories passed down without anyone quite remembering where the custom first began. There's something gentle in imagining people, across generations, reaching instinctively for something small and soft when they needed a little extra courage or comfort. Tonight, you don't need a charm for that. Just the simple, steady fact of your own breathing is enough to carry you safely through until morning. But that is only one small part of the story. Rabbits appear again and again throughout literature, often standing in for something larger than themselves. In one well-loved story, an entire imagined society of rabbits builds its own culture, its own myths, its own quiet philosophy of survival, all while simply searching for a new home. In another, a single anxious, gentle rabbit and his friends wander through a 100-acre wood, embodying a kind of soft, unhurried innocence that generations of children and more than a few tired adults have found quietly comforting. There's a reason writers have returned to the rabbit again and again across the centuries. Something about this particular animal, small, watchful, vulnerable, resilient, seems to hold a mirror up to our own experience of moving cautiously through an uncertain world, gently searching for safety, for home, for rest. Perhaps, in some small way, tonight is your own quiet version of that same old story, moving gently toward rest, toward home, toward the soft, safe stillness that has been waiting for you all along. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Even a familiar phrase like going down the rabbit hole carries an old story inside it, borrowed from a curious girl who followed a hurried, waistcoat-wearing rabbit into a hole in the ground and tumbled into an entirely different world. That single image, a narrow opening in the earth leading somewhere unexpected, somewhere stranger and more wondrous than the surface above, captured something people have kept returning to ever since, whenever they describe getting pulled unexpectedly deep into some new and absorbing thought. It's worth noticing that the phrase, more than a century old now, still relies on the same quiet truth the rest of tonight has been resting on. That this small, familiar animal has always seemed to lead towards something a little larger, a little stranger, a little more wondrous than expected, just beneath the surface of the ordinary world. There's something fitting in that, tonight, as your own mind slips gently downward, away from the surface of the day, towards something quieter and stranger, and more restful waiting just beneath. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Not every chapter of the rabbit's story is a gentle one. In the 19th century, a small number of European rabbits were released onto the vast open landscape of Australia, a continent with no natural predators built specifically to control their numbers. Within decades, their population exploded almost beyond belief, spreading across the continent at a pace faster than almost any mammal introduction in recorded history, reshaping entire ecosystems as they went. It became one of the most dramatic examples in history of how a small, seemingly harmless creature moved far from the pressures that once kept it in balance, can transform an entire landscape. Eventually, extraordinary measures, including a specifically engineered virus, were used in an attempt to control the population. A stark reminder of just how powerful this soft, quiet animal's old evolutionary strategy of abundance can become when the old checks that once balanced it are suddenly missing. There's something worth simply sitting within that story without needing a tidy lesson from it. A reminder that even the gentlest things carry real power, and that balance, wherever it's found, in ecosystems or in ourselves, is something worth quietly protecting. But that is only one small part of the story. Beneath a rabbit's soft exterior lies a surprisingly delicate skeleton. A rabbit's bones make up a smaller percentage of its total body weight than almost any other mammal of comparable size. Light, thin-walled, built almost like the frame of a small, fast bicycle, rather than the sturdy chassis of a larger animal. This lightness is precisely what allows for that explosive, sudden speed we talked about earlier. But that same lightness comes with real fragility. A rabbit's spine, in particular, is vulnerable to injury if the animal is held incorrectly or struggles hard against restraint. The powerful muscles of the hind, legs capable of generating more force than the delicate bones of the back, were ever built to withstand safely. It's a body built entirely around a single trade-off: extraordinary speed, purchased at the cost of extraordinary fragility. There's something worth noticing in that trade-off tonight, gently, without judgment. So many strengths carry a corresponding softness somewhere nearby. Being fast doesn't mean being unbreakable. Being resilient doesn't mean needing to be handled roughly. softness and strength were never really opposites to begin with. There's something else worth resting on for a moment. A wild rabbit's life is statistically often quite short. Many don't survive their first year, caught between disease, weather, and the enormous number of predators that see rabbits as a reliable, abundant food source. And yet, in captivity, away from those particular pressures, a rabbit can often live 8, 10, sometimes even 12 years or more. An entire different lifespan, hidden inside the same basic animal, depending almost entirely on the conditions surrounding it. It's a striking reminder of how much of a life's length and shape depends not just on what a creature is, but on the environment holding it. How much safety, how much steadiness, how much freedom from constant threat can change what's actually possible for the same small heart to experience. There's something worth holding gently in that tonight. Whatever pressures your own day carried, this particular moment, right now, is a safer, steadier one. Let your body notice that difference and rest a little more deeply into it. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Rabbits mark their world almost entirely through scent, in ways mostly invisible to us. Beneath the chin sits a small scent gland, and rabbits will rub this gland gently against objects, fence posts, furniture, even the people and animals they trust, leaving behind an odorless to us signature that says, quietly and permanently, "This belongs to me," or "This is safe," or "I was here." It's called chinning, and it happens constantly. An entire invisible layer of communication and ownership written directly onto the surfaces of a rabbit's world, understood perfectly by other rabbits, and completely unnoticed by almost every human nearby. There's something worth imagining in that hidden layer tonight. How much quiet care and marking and claiming happens in any life, invisible to the people around us, understood only by those closest enough to read it. You don't need anyone to notice your own quiet efforts tonight either. Rest is allowed to be an entirely private, unnoticed thing. But that is only one small part of the story. Grooming for a rabbit isn't simply about cleanliness. It's deeply social. Rabbits who trust each other will often groom one another's faces and ears. A slow, careful, reciprocal act that strengthens bonds within a warren, calms anxious individuals, and reinforces the quiet social ties holding a group together. A rabbit being groomed will often go almost limp with contentment, eyes half closed, entirely trusting the careful attention of another. It's one of the clearest windows into how much emotional life exists inside these small, quiet animals. Comfort, trust, and closeness expressed through nothing more than slow, patient, repeated touch. There's something worth letting yourself receive in that image tonight, even without another creature actually present. Just the idea of slow, repeated, patient care, offered without hurry, without demand, is enough to let your own body soften a little further into rest. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Wild rabbits and domestic rabbits, despite looking sometimes quite different, remain genetically the very same species. Every fluffy, floppy-eared, oddly colored domestic breed descended, ultimately, from the same wild European rabbit that once lived only on that one small peninsula. Selective breeding by people over centuries produced enormous variety, giant breeds weighing as much as a medium-sized dog, tiny breeds small enough to fit in two cupped hands, colors, and coat textures the wild ancestor never carried. And yet, beneath all that surface variety, the same underlying instincts remain quietly intact in nearly every one of them. The same thump of alarm, the same joyful binky, the same twitching nose reading the world in careful little breaths. Centuries of careful breeding changed the outside considerably, while the deep, old instincts underneath stayed remarkably, quietly the same. There's something worth holding onto in that tonight. Whatever has changed on the surface of your own life recently, something steady and old and deeply yours likely remains quietly intact underneath it all, patient, unchanged, simply waiting for rest to reveal it again. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. A rabbit's whiskers are not decorative. They are precision instruments, roughly as wide as the rabbit's own body, allowing the animal to judge in complete darkness, without needing to see at all, whether a gap or tunnel ahead is wide enough to pass through safely. Brush past something in the dark, and those whiskers report back instantly. A kind of built-in measuring tape carried permanently on the face. This matters enormously for an animal that spends real time underground, in burrows too dark for eyes to be of any use at all. In that total darkness, touch becomes the primary sense, whiskers doing quietly and reliably what eyes simply cannot do down there. There's something worth trusting in that tonight, in the dark, wherever you happen to be resting right now. You don't need to see clearly to be safe. Sometimes the parts of you built for the dark know exactly how to guide you gently through it. But that is only one small part of the story. Not every rabbit lives in a warm grassland. The Arctic hare, found in the far cold reaches of the northern hemisphere, has adapted to conditions most animals could never survive. Thick fur, a compact rounded body shape that conserves heat far better than a leaner build would, and the ability to huddle in small groups, sharing warmth against brutal winds and temperatures that regularly fall far below freezing. In the deepest cold, Arctic hares will sometimes dig shallow depressions directly into snowbanks, using the surrounding snow itself as insulation. The same way a thick blanket of fresh snow can actually help protect plants and small animals from even colder air above. The cold, in a strange way, becomes part of the shelter itself. There's something worth resting in tonight, in that idea that even something as harsh as deep cold can, when approached the right way, become part of what protects you rather than only what threatens you. Whatever felt difficult about today can soften now into simply being part of the quiet shelter surrounding you tonight. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Jackrabbits, despite the name, aren't rabbits at all. They're actually hares, a close but distinct relative. One of their most striking features are their enormous ears, some of the largest relative to body size of any lagomorph, laced with a dense network of blood vessels close to the surface. In the heat of a desert afternoon, a jackrabbit can direct blood flow specifically toward those large, thin ears, releasing excess body heat into the surrounding air the same way a car radiator releases engine heat, allowing the animal to stay active and cool even in punishing desert temperatures, where many other creatures would need to retreat entirely into shade or burrows. There's something worth imagining in that gentle release of heat tonight. Anything warm, tense, or overactive in your own body right now simply drifting outward and away. The same unhurried way heat drifts outward through a jackrabbit's quiet, patient ears. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Rabbits, as prey animals near the base of many food webs, play an outsized role in shaping the landscapes around them. Through constant, steady grazing, they keep grasslands short and open, preventing certain plants from overtaking others, creating habitat conditions that many other smaller species, insects, ground-nesting birds, even certain wildflowers, depend on to survive. Remove rabbits from certain ecosystems entirely, and the landscape itself can shift dramatically within just a few years. Taller grasses and shrubs slowly crowding out the open, low meadows that once supported a much wider variety of other life. A small, quiet grazer, simply going about its ordinary day, turns out to be holding an entire landscape gently in balance. There's something worth appreciating in that kind of quiet influence tonight. How something small and steady, simply doing its ordinary work without any grand intention, can end up holding an entire wider world gently together. But that is only one small part of the story. Rabbit vision, while extraordinarily wide, is not quite like ours in terms of color, where human eyes generally detect 3 primary colors. A rabbit's eyes detect closer to 2, making their world somewhat more muted in color range than the one we experience, leaning more toward blues and greens, with threads appearing much duller or harder to distinguish. What they may lack in color richness, though, they make up for in extraordinary sensitivity to motion, particularly at the edges of their wide field of view. An evolutionary trade entirely in keeping with everything else about this animal. Better to notice the faintest movement of danger approaching from any direction than to appreciate the full, rich palette of a sunset. There's something worth considering gently in that trade tonight. How different creatures are built to notice entirely different things about the very same world. None of them wrong, simply tuned to what mattered most for their own particular kind of survival. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Rabbit heart rates run remarkably fast compared to our own, often somewhere between 130 and 325 beats per minute, depending on the individual and how calm or startled they are. For comparison, a calm, resting human heart typically beats somewhere around 60 to 100 times in that same minute. A rabbit's entire physiology runs faster, tighter, more urgently tuned than ours, built for a life where reaction time can mean the difference between safety and disaster. This heightened sensitivity, though, comes with a real vulnerability. Rabbits are known to be susceptible to significant stress from sudden loud noises or rough handling. Their fast, sensitive hearts sometimes reacting powerfully to fear alone. It's part of why gentle, quiet, predictable environments matter so much for a rabbit's well-being. Their whole nervous system is simply built to take alarm seriously every single time. There's something worth noticing gently in that tonight, without judgment. If your own mind sometimes reacts quickly and intensely to small stresses, that isn't a flaw. It may simply be a nervous system, not unlike the rabbits, doing exactly what it was built to do, taking care of you, perhaps a little more urgently than the moment actually requires. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Even the specific patterns of fur coloring on domestic rabbits carry an entire hidden science underneath them. Genetics passed down through specific combinations of dominant and recessive traits. Some breeds carrying color patterns that took generations of careful, patient selection to stabilize. A single litter can sometimes produce kits of entirely different colors and patterns, each one a quiet expression of genetic information passed down invisibly through countless earlier generations. Every soft brown, gray, white, or spotted coat carries, folded invisibly inside it, a long lineage of ancestors, choices, and quiet biological history, stretching back further than anyone watching that litter could ever fully trace. There's something worth holding gently in that tonight. How much quiet history is folded invisibly into anything soft and simple looking on the surface, including, gently, your own life tonight, carrying inside it more history and resilience than tonight's tiredness might let you fully remember. But that is only one small part of the story. Rabbits rarely sleep the way we do. Even in their deepest rest, many rabbits keep their eyes only partly closed, sometimes barely closed at all. A thin sliver of awareness held open even in sleep. It isn't restlessness. It's simply an old habit built by a very long history of needing to notice danger the instant it arrives, even in the middle of dreaming. And yet, when a rabbit does feel entirely safe, truly safe, in a way that takes real trust to reach, it will sometimes flop completely onto its side, legs stretched out loosely, body utterly limp, eyes fully closed at last. Rabbit people have a soft, simple word for this too: the flop. It can look almost alarming the first time you see it. A small body suddenly collapsing sideways onto the ground. But it is, in fact, one of the purest signs of contentment this animal ever shows. There's something worth reaching for in that image tonight. Not the thin, watchful sliver of sleep, but the flop. The complete, unguarded, trusting kind of rest, where every muscle finally agrees there is nothing left to watch for. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Long before rabbits were kept simply as companions, they were kept for food. And one of the more curious chapters of that history unfolded quietly inside medieval European monasteries. Monks began raising rabbits in walled enclosures, and at some point, a peculiar theological question arose. Did unborn or newborn rabbit kits count as meat, or as something closer to fish, which could be eaten even during periods of religious fasting? Remarkably, in certain times and places, the answer landed in the rabbit's favor. Very young kits, called lorics, were sometimes permitted during fasting seasons when other meat was forbidden. It's a strange, small footnote in history, an entire animal's fate quietly shaped, in part, by centuries-old questions about what counts as fish. There's something almost tender in imagining these animals, kept gently inside monastery walls, tended by quiet hands, under a quiet rule of patience and routine, centuries before anyone imagined them as companions curled up beside a fire. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. The Latin word for rabbit, cuniculus, has quietly outlived the empire that used it. It traveled into Old English as coney, a word once so common that entire towns and streets in England still carry its trace today, even though most people passing through no longer recognize where the name came from. Older translations of certain religious texts even used coney to describe small burrowing animals mentioned in ancient scripture. carrying this same word forward across centuries of careful, patient translation. There's something worth appreciating in that long, quiet thread of language. A single old word, older than most of the buildings still standing today, passed carefully from one generation of speakers to the next, worn smooth and half forgotten, still hiding quietly inside street signs and old books, waiting to be noticed. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Rabbits are almost entirely silent creatures, which makes the rare moments they do make sound especially striking. When utterly content, being gently groomed, resting beside a trusted companion, some rabbits will very softly grind their teeth in a light, rhythmic way. A sound rabbit owners often describe as something close to a cat's purr. It's barely audible, easy to miss entirely if you aren't listening closely. There's a quiet symmetry in an animal that spends almost its entire life in silence, choosing to break that silence only for the gentlest possible reason. Not warning, not distress, simply comfort, expressed so softly it can hardly be heard at all. If your own mind feels quiet and wordless right now, that isn't emptiness. It might simply be the sound of something at ease, something with nothing urgent left to say. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Rabbits also occasionally rise fully onto their hind legs, body stretched tall and still, front paws tucked close, scanning the grass ahead for anything their low, ground-level view might have missed. People who watch rabbits closely sometimes call this periscoping, a small, upright pause in an otherwise low, close-to-the-earth existence. It's a brief, careful gesture, rising just high enough to widen the view, then settling back down again once the moment passes. Not a dramatic change, just a small, temporary shift in perspective, taken only when it's needed, released the moment it no longer is. There's something worth borrowing in that small, temporary rising and settling. Sometimes, all a tired mind needs is one small, brief widening of perspective, just enough to notice that everything really is all right, before settling back down again into rest. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Selective breeding by people over the centuries didn't just change rabbit coloring. It changed size dramatically as well. The Flemish giant, one of the largest rabbit breeds, can grow to the size of a small dog, sometimes weighing well over 20 pounds, calm and gentle despite its considerable size. At the other end of that same spectrum sits the Netherland dwarf, fully grown at barely 2 or 3 pounds, small enough to rest comfortably in two cupped hands. Both breeds, giant and tiny alike, descend from the very same wild ancestor, shaped over generations entirely by which rabbits people chose, gently and patiently, to breed together. An entire spectrum of size, generated slowly, one careful pairing at a time. There's something worth noticing in that spectrum tonight. How much range can exist within a single shared origin? How differently the exact same beginning can eventually unfold. None of the results more correct than any other, simply different expressions of the very same starting thread. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Rabbits carry fine, sensitive whiskers not only around the nose and mouth, but above the eyes and along the cheeks as well. An entire quiet network of touch spread carefully across the face. Each one connects to a rich cluster of nerves beneath the skin, feeding a steady stream of tactile information back to the brain, helping the rabbit navigate close spaces, tight burrow tunnels, and thick undergrowth without needing to rely on sight at all. It's easy to imagine whiskers as decoration, a simple flourish on an already soft face. In truth, they are quietly some of the most information-rich structures the rabbit possesses, constantly gathering, constantly informing, mostly invisible to how we usually think about this animal. There's something worth appreciating in that hidden richness tonight. How much quiet sensing and gathering can happen through something that looks, from the outside, like nothing more than a simple, delicate detail. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Because rabbits cannot cool themselves through sweating or heavy panting the way many other mammals can, they are especially vulnerable to overheating, relying almost entirely on their ears, their environment, and their own behavior, resting in shade, staying still during the hottest parts of the day, to stay within a safe temperature range. A rabbit's relationship with heat is, in many ways, a relationship built on avoidance and careful timing rather than active cooling. This is part of why the crepuscular rhythm we began with tonight matters so much. Dawn and dusk aren't simply about avoiding predators. They're also the coolest, gentlest hours of the day. Hours a small body, without built-in air conditioning, can move through far more safely and comfortably than the harsh heat of full afternoon sun. There's something worth returning to gently in that rhythm tonight. The wisdom, built over millions of years, of simply choosing the softest, coolest, gentlest hours to be active in, and resting quietly through everything else. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. In parts of southern Europe, the wild rabbit has long been considered something close to a keystone species, an animal whose presence quietly supports an entire surrounding web of other creatures. The Iberian lynx, one of the rarest wild cats on Earth, depends on wild rabbits for the overwhelming majority of its diet. Eagles, foxes, and countless other predators across the same landscapes depend on healthy rabbit populations in much the same way. When rabbit populations have dropped sharply in these regions due to disease or habitat change, The effects have rippled outward through the entire ecosystem. Entire predator populations struggling in turn. A small, soft, quiet animal once again turns out to be holding far more of the surrounding world together than its size would ever suggest. There's something worth carrying gently from that tonight. How something small and unassuming can, without ever intending to, become essential to everything around it, simply by continuing, quietly and steadily, to exist. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. A rabbit's feet are more than instruments of speed. Pressed flat against the earth, they are also remarkably sensitive to vibration, able to detect the faint tremor of an approaching badger or ferret digging steadily toward a burrow from some distance away, long before any sound or scent would give the danger away. The whole body becomes a kind of listening instrument, tuned not to the air, but to the ground itself. It's one more layer in an already carefully layered system of awareness. Nose reading scent, ears reading sound, eyes reading motion, and feet, quietly, constantly, reading the trembling language of the earth beneath them. There's something steadying in imagining a body that attentive, that thoroughly wrapped in awareness, and still capable, when it finally feels safe, of resting completely. If a body built with that many layers of vigilance can still learn to let go completely into rest, so gently can yours. But that is only one small part of the story. Today, wild or feral rabbits can be found on nearly every continent except Antarctica, Europe, where they began, but also the Americas, Australia, and countless islands scattered across every ocean. Almost none of this happened naturally. Nearly every population outside that original small corner of Europe traces back to people, carrying rabbits deliberately onto ships, into new colonies, onto isolated islands meant to serve as future food sources for sailors who might one day be shipwrecked there. It's a strange kind of global journey for an animal that never once chose it, carried again and again into entirely unfamiliar landscapes, simply because it was small, manageable, and reliably able to keep reproducing once it arrived. A creature that began in one quiet corner of the world now quietly touches nearly all of it. There's something worth noticing in that spread tonight, without needing to resolve it into anything more than what it is. How far something small and soft can travel, carried gently along by forces much larger than itself, and still, somehow, remain exactly what it always was underneath. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Inside a rabbit's digestive system sits an organ disproportionately large for its body. The cecum, a wide, curved pouch positioned where the small and large intestine meet, capable of holding a volume larger than the rabbit's own stomach. Inside this pouch lives an enormous, complex community of bacteria, quietly fermenting tough plant fiber the rabbit's own body could never break down alone. This hidden internal ecosystem does an extraordinary amount of invisible work, transforming grass and fiber most animals would find useless into a form of nutrition the rabbit can actually use. None of it requires any conscious effort from the rabbit at all. It simply happens continuously in the background, exactly the way it's supposed to. There's something worth trusting in that tonight. So much of what keeps any of us going happens exactly like this, quietly, continuously, entirely, without needing our attention or effort. Unseen systems simply doing their patient, necessary work while we rest. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Rabbits are, in their own quiet way, territorial, and they mark the boundaries of their space with small, round droppings left deliberately in certain favored spots, sometimes called latrine areas. Rather than scattering them randomly, many rabbits will consistently return to the same specific locations, building up a kind of quiet, chemical signature that tells any rabbit passing through exactly whose ground this is. It's an entire invisible map layered over the visible one, understood completely by rabbits and almost entirely invisible to us, defining neighborhoods and borders across a landscape that, to human eyes, looks like nothing more than an ordinary, undivided field. There's something worth imagining gently in that layered world tonight. How much quiet structure and order can exist just beneath the surface of something that looks, from the outside, like simple open space. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. One rabbit breed carries a particularly soft distinction, the Angora, prized for centuries for its extraordinarily long, fine, silky coat. Periodically, an Angora rabbit's fur is gently combed or clipped and spun into a delicate, luxurious yarn, used for generations in some of the softest wool garments people have ever made. It's a strange, gentle kind of partnership, stretched across centuries, an animal valued not for speed, not for meat, but simply for the extraordinary softness of what quietly grows on its own body, given up gently and grown back again, season after season, without any harm to the rabbit at all. There's something fitting, tonight of all nights, in resting on an animal whose entire long-standing value to some people has simply been softness itself, grown patiently, given gently, renewed again and again. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Well, before giving birth, a pregnant rabbit begins building her nest with unmistakable care. In the final day or so before her kits arrive, she will often pull soft fur directly from her own belly and chest, lining a simple depression in the ground with it, layer by careful layer, until it becomes warm, soft, and enclosed enough to hold newborns that cannot yet regulate their own body temperature at all. This single act of pulling her own fur loose, gently and deliberately, to build warmth for young she hasn't even met yet, is one of the clearest expressions of instinctive care found anywhere in the animal world. Need translated directly, wordlessly, into preparation. There's something worth holding gently in that image tonight. However it lands for you, the quiet, patient act of preparing softness and warmth in advance, simply because you already sense, somewhere underneath thought, that safety and rest are going to be needed. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. At the very back of a rabbit's eye lies a thin, reflective layer called the tapetum lucidum, the same structure responsible for the way a cat's or a deer's eyes seem to glow faintly if caught by a flashlight at night. This layer works like a small internal mirror, bouncing available light back through the eye a second time, giving the rabbit noticeably better vision in the low, dim light of dawn and dusk than most daytime creatures could ever manage. It's a beautifully efficient solution to a very specific problem. Rather than needing more light, the rabbit's eye simply learned, over great spans of time, to use every small bit of available light twice. There's something worth borrowing from that tonight. The idea that you don't always need more of something to feel like enough. Sometimes what's already quietly available, used gently and fully, turns out to be exactly enough. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. On a small, now vanished Mediterranean island, millions of years ago, an entirely different kind of rabbit once lived, a giant, several times the size of any rabbit alive today. Its legs shorter and sturdier, its body heavier, its brain relative to its size, somewhat smaller than its mainland relatives. Scientists who later uncovered its fossils gave it a fittingly grand name, one that translates roughly to the Menorcan king of the rabbits. Without the predators that shaped rabbits everywhere else, this ancient island giant had no need for the same explosive speed or constant vigilance. Over countless generations, in the safety of that isolated island, it simply relaxed into something larger, slower, and calmer than its mainland cousins ever could afford to become. There's something worth carrying gently from that ancient, giant, long-vanished rabbit tonight. The idea that in a place truly free of threat, even a creature built for endless watchfulness will slowly, patiently, allow itself to grow calmer, softer, and more at ease. But that is only one small part of the story. In the middle of the 19th century, a French scientist working to understand rabies turned, again and again, to rabbits in his careful, patient laboratory work, using them to help develop one of the earliest vaccines the world had ever seen. It wasn't a role the rabbit chose, and it wasn't without real cost to the animals involved. But it became, quietly, one of the pivotal threads in a much larger story. The slow, careful human effort to understand disease well enough to finally begin protecting against it. Long before that, and long after, rabbits have appeared again and again at the edges of scientific discovery, small and unassuming, present in the background of breakthroughs far larger than themselves, rarely given credit, rarely remembered by name. There's something worth noticing gently in that pattern tonight. How often the quiet, small, easily overlooked pieces of any larger story turn out, on closer look, to have mattered far more than anyone paused to recognize at the time. There's something else worth resting on for a moment. A rabbit's alarm thump doesn't only speak to other rabbits. Deer, ground-nesting birds, and other small mammals sharing the same meadow have been observed responding to the sudden vibration of a rabbit's warning, startling into alertness, even though the message was never meant for them at all. In this quiet way, an entire shared landscape sometimes listens together. One species' caution rippling outward to protect neighbors it never intended to warn. It's a small, unplanned kind of generosity, entirely unintentional, built from nothing more than proximity and a shared patch of ground. Safety, once sent outward, doesn't always stay contained to the one who sent it. There's something worth resting in, gently, tonight, in that idea, that steadiness offered quietly in one place has a way of rippling outward further than it was ever meant to reach, settling more of the world than we usually realize. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. For a young kit growing inside that dark, fur-lined nest we spoke of earlier, the whole world begins in complete stillness and complete dark, warmth pressed close on every side, the muffled, distant rhythm of a mother's return marking the only real passage of time. There is no sight yet, no real sound, nothing to do, but simply exist, warm and held, until a body finally finishes the quiet work of becoming ready for the world outside. It is, in its own way, one of the gentlest possible beginnings. No demands, no expectations, simply darkness, warmth, and patient, unhurried growth, entirely trusted to unfold exactly on its own time. There's something worth returning to, gently, in that image tonight, as your own day finally closes. You don't need sight or sound or effort right now either. Just warmth, just stillness, just patient, unhurried trust that whatever needs to happen next will happen quietly, entirely on its own. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Even a rabbit's stillness has layers to it. Ears low and folded back can mean caution. Ears fully upright and turning slowly can mean simple curiosity. A body pressed flat and small can mean fear, while that same body stretched long and loose on its side can mean nothing but ease. To someone who has never learned to look closely, a resting rabbit might seem like one simple, unmoving shape. To someone who has spent real time watching, it becomes an entire quiet language, written only in posture, position, and the small angle of an ear. There's something worth carrying from that tonight. How much can be communicated without a single word, simply through how a body chooses to hold itself in a given moment. Your own body, right now, however it's arranged, however heavy or light it feels, is already speaking its own quiet language of rest, without needing you to translate a single part of it. But that is only one small part of the story. Unlike many mammals, who release eggs on a fixed, repeating cycle whether or not mating occurs, rabbits are what biologists call induced ovulators. The act of mating itself triggers the release of an egg, rather than an internal calendar deciding the timing in advance. It's an unusual biological arrangement, shared by only a small number of other species, and it means a female rabbit's reproductive readiness is tied less to rigid timing and more to circumstance itself. There's a certain elegance in a system built that way, responsive rather than scheduled, shaped by what actually happens rather than forcing what happens to fit a predetermined plan. Tonight doesn't need to fit a rigid schedule either. Rest can simply arrive when the conditions are right for it, in its own responsive, unhurried time. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. A rabbit's list of natural predators is remarkably long, considering how small and unassuming the animal itself appears. Hawks and owls watch from above. Foxes, weasels, stoats, and badgers hunt from the ground. Snakes take eggs and very young kits directly from the nest. Even domestic cats and dogs, in more developed landscapes, add themselves quietly to that same long list. Very few animals of similar size face quite so many different kinds of threats from quite so many different directions at once. And yet, despite this, or perhaps in a strange way, because of it, rabbits have remained remarkably successful, remarkably widespread, for tens of millions of years. Being hunted by nearly everyone never stopped this particular animal from continuing, generation after generation, to simply carry on. There's something quietly steadying in that thought tonight. Facing many small pressures doesn't have to mean being overwhelmed by them. It can simply mean building, patiently, layer by layer, exactly the kind of resilience that lets you keep going anyway. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. The floppy, drooping ears seen on certain domestic rabbit breeds, like the English lop, don't appear anywhere in wild rabbit populations. They emerged only through generations of human breeding, a side effect connected to subtle changes in skull and cartilage development that seem to appear again and again. Whenever animals are bred for tameness over many generations, in foxes, in dogs, in rabbits alike, scientists studying rabbit genomes have found that domestication left clear, traceable fingerprints, not just on behavior, but quietly written into the shape of the skull itself. It's a strange and gentle reminder that gentleness itself can leave a physical mark, passed down slowly, generation after generation, until an entirely new shape emerges from nothing more than centuries of calm, patient selection. There's something worth holding in that tonight, the idea that softness and calm, given enough time and enough repetition, can genuinely reshape something at the deepest level, not just for a moment, but permanently, gently, for generations afterward. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. A rabbit's eyes sit so far apart and process so much of the surrounding world independently of one another that only a narrow strip directly ahead is ever seen by both eyes together at once. Most of what a rabbit sees is viewed by only one eye at a time, processed somewhat separately by each side of the brain, rather than blended into a single unified view the way most of our own vision works. It's a genuinely different way of experiencing the world, less like one continuous picture, and more like two wide, separate reports, gathered constantly, almost never needing to fully agree with each other to still keep the animal safe. There's something worth considering gently in that tonight. How there isn't only one correct way to take in the world. How understanding doesn't always have to arrive as a single unified picture. Sometimes scattered impressions, gathered gently and never quite fully assembled, are more than enough. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. In the cold forests of northern Canada, the population of snowshoe hares rises and falls in a strikingly regular rhythm, roughly every 10 years, and the population of their primary predator, the Canada lynx, rises and falls right along with it, trailing slightly behind. When hares are abundant, lynx thrive and multiply. As lynx numbers grow, hare numbers eventually fall. And as hares become scarce, lynx numbers fall in turn, until hares slowly recover again, and the whole long, patient cycle quietly begins once more. It's one of the most famous and carefully studied population patterns in all of ecology. A slow, repeating wave stretched across decades. Two entirely different species locked together in a rhythm neither one controls alone. There's something worth resting in tonight, in that old, patient rhythm, the reminder that rising and falling, ebbing and returning again, isn't failure or disorder. It's simply how many living systems, including tired minds on any given night, have always found their way back toward balance. there is something else worth resting on for a moment. Rabbits actually produce two distinctly different kinds of waste, not one. We spoke earlier of the soft cecotropes, re-eaten directly for their nutrition. But alongside those, a rabbit also produces small, round, dry fecal pellets made almost entirely of digested fiber, left behind rather than reconsumed. Gardeners have long prized this particular byproduct, since it's gentle enough, unlike many other animal manures, to be added directly to soil without first needing to age or break down, quietly enriching whatever grows there next. There's something fitting in an animal whose very waste continues giving something useful back to the world around it. One small, unassuming pellet at a time, feeding a cycle of growth it will likely never see the results of itself. There's something worth carrying from that tonight. How even the smallest, most overlooked parts of a full, ordinary day can still be quietly useful, feeding something good forward, whether or not you ever get to witness where it eventually leads. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Across the Chinese zodiac, one of 12 years in the repeating cycle belongs to the rabbit, traditionally associated with gentleness, careful thinking, and a quiet kind of good fortune. People born under this sign are often described in traditional folklore as diplomatic, calm under pressure, and skilled at finding peaceful solutions rather than confrontation. Traits that map, in their own way, onto everything we've spent tonight exploring about the animal itself. It's a lovely kind of symmetry, watching an entire cultural tradition arrive, independently, at roughly the same character this small creature seems to embody everywhere else it appears: watchful, gentle, quietly resourceful, never needing force to get by. There's something worth resting in tonight, in borrowing just a little of that old, well-wished character for yourself. Gentle, watchful, quietly at peace, exactly the way this particular year, this particular animal, has always been imagined to be. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. Long before European fairy tales gave rabbits their gentle, storybook softness, older oral traditions across parts of Africa and among indigenous peoples of the American Southeast told stories of a clever, quick-witted rabbit who regularly outsmarted larger, stronger animals through wit alone rather than strength. These trickster rabbit tales traveled and blended over centuries, eventually surfacing in new forms in later American folklore. The small hero winning again and again, not through size or force, but through patience, cleverness, and careful timing. It's a very old kind of comfort, really, carried forward across an enormous span of time and geography. The reassurance that being small doesn't mean being powerless. That quiet wit and patient timing have always been just as capable of carrying someone safely through as raw strength ever was. There's something worth holding on to in that old, well-traveled story tonight. You don't need force to get safely through to morning. Just patience, just quiet, just the simple, steady passage of time, doing what it always eventually does. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. A rabbit's leap and run share almost nothing with the flat, even stride of a horse or a dog. Their motion is what biologists call saltatorial, built around powerful, springing leaps rather than a smooth, continuous gait. Hind legs driving hard against the ground, while the shorter front legs simply catch and steady each landing. It's closer, in mechanical terms, to the motion of a kangaroo than to almost any other animal a similar size. This bounding rhythm, uneven and springing rather than smooth and level, turns out to be remarkably efficient for quick, unpredictable acceleration across open, uneven ground, trading elegance for a kind of raw, springing readiness that serves this animal exceptionally well when survival depends on the very first instant of movement. There's something worth noticing gently in that uneven rhythm tonight. How movement or rest doesn't need to be smooth or even to still be exactly right. Sometimes the most effective rhythm is the one built specifically for the particular body carrying it. However unusual its shape might look from the outside. But that is only one small part of the story. A kit stays inside the nest for a surprisingly short time before beginning to venture out into the wider world. By around 3 weeks old, young rabbits are already nibbling at grass alongside their mother's milk. And by 4 or 5 weeks, many are almost entirely independent, capable of feeding, moving, and watching for danger largely on their own. What began as a blind, hairless, utterly helpless creature becomes, within little more than a month, something already carrying the same careful instincts as every rabbit before it. There's no lingering childhood here, no long, slow unfolding of independence, the way many mammals experience it. Just a short, intense season of complete dependence, followed quickly by a quiet, steady readiness to carry on alone. There's something worth appreciating gently in that swift unfolding tonight. How quickly a body, once given even a small window of safety and warmth, can gather everything it needs to eventually stand steady on its own. There is something else worth resting on for a moment. A rabbit's hearing reaches well beyond the upper range of what human ears can detect, extending into frequencies we would call ultrasonic, far higher pitched than anything we could ever consciously notice. This wider range lets a rabbit pick up on subtle high-pitched sounds many potential predators make without meaning to. Tiny rustles and movements pitched just beyond the edge of what most other animals nearby can perceive at all. It's a quiet reminder that the world any of us experiences is only ever a partial one, filtered through whatever range of senses happen to be built into the particular body doing the experiencing. There is always more sound, more motion, more information present in any given moment than any single creature, rabbit or otherwise, could ever fully take in. There's something almost restful in that thought tonight, permission, in a way, to stop trying to notice everything, to simply trust that your senses are gathering exactly what they need to quietly in the background without requiring your full attention to do it well. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Engineers studying efficient cooling systems have at times looked directly to the rabbit's large, thin, blood-rich ears for inspiration, borrowing the same basic principle: a wide surface area, close to the surrounding air, allowing heat to disperse gradually without requiring extra energy or moving parts. It's a small, elegant example of what researchers sometimes call biomimicry, human design quietly borrowing solutions that evolution had already spent millions of patient years perfecting. There's something fitting in that. An animal whose entire existence depends on staying calm, cool, and unhurried has, in its own quiet way, taught people something about how to build calm, efficient cooling into systems far larger than itself. There's something worth borrowing from that tonight, too, gently. The reminder that calm, unhurried release of heat, of tension, of anything held too tightly, doesn't need force or extra effort. It only needs enough open, unguarded surface for it to drift quietly away. There's something else worth resting on for a moment. Not every rabbit species is thriving today the way the familiar European rabbit has. The riverine rabbit, found only along a narrow stretch of South Africa's Karoo region, and the pygmy rabbit, native to sagebrush landscapes in parts of the western United States, both remain quite rare, their populations shaped by how much of their very specific habitat still remains intact. Unlike their widespread, adaptable cousins, these rabbits depend on particular plants, particular soils, particular narrow strips of a very specific landscape to survive at all. Conservationists in both regions have worked carefully, patiently, over years, simply to give these smaller, quieter populations enough undisturbed space to continue existing at all. A reminder that not every version of this ancient, resilient family has had an easy, expansive story. There's something worth resting on gently in that tonight, without needing to resolve it. How even within the same wide, old, successful family, some branches remain fragile, needing quiet protection, patient care, and enough undisturbed space simply to keep going. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we move. Among several indigenous peoples of North America, Older stories tell of a great, powerful rabbit figure, sometimes a trickster, sometimes a creator, sometimes both at once, who shaped parts of the world through cleverness, patience, and a willingness to outthink far larger and more powerful beings. In some Algonquian traditions, this figure is remembered as a central character in stories explaining the shape of the land itself, the origin of fire, or the rhythms of the seasons. It's remarkable, in its own quiet way, how often across the world, entirely independent of one another, cultures reached for this same small, unassuming animal whenever they needed to imagine cleverness, resilience, or quiet creative power. Never the largest creature in the story, but very often the one who mattered most by the end of it. There's something worth carrying gently from that tonight, as we near the end of our own wandering. The old, widespread, deeply human instinct to find real power not in size or force, but in something small, patient, and quietly clever. Exactly the kind of steadiness you already carry inside you tonight. But that is only one small part of the story. Compared to many other mammals of similar size, a rabbit's heart and lungs are proportionally quite large, built to move oxygen quickly and efficiently through the body the instant it's needed. At rest, much of that capacity sits quietly unused, held in reserve, ready to be called on the moment a sudden burst of speed becomes necessary. It's a body built around margin, more capacity than the ordinary, quiet moments actually require, simply so that the extraordinary moments, when they come, are never a problem. There's something worth noticing in that kind of built-in margin tonight. You don't have to use every part of yourself in every moment to still be enough. Sometimes the quiet, unused reserve sitting patiently inside you is exactly what makes the ordinary, restful moments feel so safe to simply settle into. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we let this all go completely. For all the centuries people have spent studying, breeding, hunting, keeping, and telling stories about rabbits, the animal itself has needed remarkably little of that attention to simply continue being exactly what it has always been: soft, watchful, quick, endlessly adaptable, entirely unbothered by whichever story happened to be told about it in a given century or culture. Long after tonight, long after every fact we've wandered through together has softened into something you can no longer quite recall, somewhere out there, a rabbit will still be sitting quietly at the edge of a field in the last soft light of evening, doing exactly what rabbits have always done. There's something deeply steadying in that continuity tonight, the knowledge that some things simply keep going, gently, patiently, regardless of whether anyone is paying attention. You're allowed to stop paying attention now too. There is one more thing worth lingering on before we let this all go completely. Rabbits, unlike many burrowing animals, don't hibernate. Even through the coldest months, they remain active, adjusting their behavior rather than shutting down entirely, thicker fur growing in gradually as the days shorten, activity shifting to make the most of whatever brief warmth the low winter sun offers. Rather than escaping the season by sleeping through it, the rabbit simply adapts to it, meeting each colder day with whatever small adjustments keep it comfortable enough to continue. There's a quiet kind of wisdom in that difference, not needing to disappear entirely from a difficult season in order to get through it, but simply adjusting gently and continuously until the season passes on its own. Whatever has felt difficult about the stretch of time behind you doesn't need to be escaped either. It only needs small, steady adjustments, made gently, one at a time, until it softens into something easier. There is something worth resting on one more time before we begin to let all of this go. Wherever a rabbit rests tonight, in a warren beneath a quiet field, in a burrow dug generations ago, in tall grass at the soft edge of dusk, it rests the same way it has rested for tens of millions of years. Still, watchful in its own quiet way, even in sleep, wrapped in fur built by ancient, patient evolution, safe enough for this moment to simply stop and be still. You can let yourself borrow a little of that tonight. Not vigilance, just the stillness underneath it, the part that has always known, quietly, patiently, exactly how to rest. You can let all of this soften now into something looser, something you don't have to hold onto carefully anymore. You don't need to remember the warrens, or the whiskers, or the 40 million years, or the moon, or any of the small, careful facts we wandered through tonight. Let them all blur gently together into a single soft impression, the way a whole day eventually blurs into a single quiet feeling of rest. Let your breathing keep slowing, a little more, and then a little more again. Let your body sink further into whatever is holding you, heavier now than it was even a few minutes ago, the way a body always grows heavier as it finally allows itself to stop holding on to anything at all. Let your body sink further into whatever is holding you. Let your thoughts, if they're still moving at all, move more like something drifting on very still water than something racing toward anywhere in particular. No destination waiting anywhere ahead of them. Nothing left to reach for tonight. Above you, right now, whether you can see it or not, the sky keeps turning the way it always has. The moon still carries its old, soft shape that so many people, across so many centuries, have quietly looked up and seen as a small, resting rabbit. The earth keeps turning, unhurried, the way it has for billions of years, long before tonight, and long after it too. None of it needs anything from you right now. It simply continues, steady and calm, holding you gently inside it while you rest, exactly the way it has held every tired mind that has ever drifted quietly off to sleep beneath it. Your mind tonight is only doing what minds have always done, trying quietly to make sense of the day behind it, sorting, softening, letting go. You don't have to help it do that work. You can simply let it happen underneath you, the way breathing happens underneath you, the way your heart keeps its own steady rhythm without ever asking your permission. Somewhere out there tonight, in a warren older than anyone can trace, or in tall grass at the soft edge of a field, a small, watchful animal is settling too, the way it has settled every night for tens of millions of years before this one. It doesn't know about tonight, or about you, or about any of the small facts we wandered through together. It simply rests, the way it always has, trusting a body that has been quietly, patiently built for exactly this. You can trust yours too, the same slow turning of the earth that has carried this small, soft animal safely through 40 million years of dawns and dusks is carrying you gently through this one as well. Nothing about tonight needs to be remembered, solved, or held onto. It only needs to be allowed, quietly, the way every ordinary night before this one has already been allowed, all the way back further than any of us could ever really count. There is nowhere else you need to be. Nothing left to finish tonight. No further ground to cover. No further thread to follow. Nothing at all left waiting to be understood before you're allowed to rest. Just this quiet, this softness, this slow settling into rest. Your body already knows how to rest. Sleep well, and good night.